Well, good morning, and my name is Martin Moss. I'm a senior advisor at Natural England in green infrastructure, and I lead on the development of the England Green Infrastructure Mapping Database. And today we have a short, and I do mean short, taster session launching version 1.2. Connoisseurs of the mapping will know that version 1.1 has been out for about a year. Today we will be launching the first upgrade. So let's have a taste of what's to come. For those who are connoisseurs, this will be old news. For those of you new to the mapping, I think it's important to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. So there are four key objectives behind the development of the database. And the first one is to provide a publicly accessible open data green infrastructure mapping resource at an England scale, and to provide common access to data, therefore, across all England. No area from now on has access to less green infrastructure evidence than that provided by this England level database. There are places in England with more data, possibly even better data, but there are places in England where that is not the case. And from now on, this at very least is something that you will have. We're there to provide evidence to support a range of national to local planning, strategy and targeting of resource needs at multiple scales, in particular at an England to local authority level, but data is also provided at more local levels, including multiple and lower super output areas. So it gets down fairly local. I will say, however, the closer you get to the ground, the more the data does need ground truthing. This is a national product, and when it interacts with very local geographies, things can start to go wrong. So we also provide the data as a download. It's capable of being supplemented with local data to match local mapping requirements as needed. So what's it all about? Well, really, it's not just a map or a set of maps for that matter. It's about understanding change. Green infrastructure is not static. It does change over time. That change can be beneficial. It can also be the opposite. We need to understand how that system, how that infrastructure is changing typologically, the sorts of things that we have out there, location and distribution, where it's changing, and how crucially that is affecting people in terms of supply, in terms of demand, inequalities across the country, the performance of the infrastructure, and the overall quality of the spaces that constitute it. So there are two key contexts to understand here. Green infrastructure I view as a socio-environmental infrastructure. In other words, it's based on plants, waters and soils, but it's there to do a job for people. So the key question is it doing that job? How do we find out? We have to look at the supply, the distribution and the quality. But underneath that, there's also a need to understand that underpinning ecosystem, the habitat competition, its condition, its diversity, on the basis that a healthy green infrastructure requires a healthy ecosystem in order to work properly. If we've got weaknesses in the ecosystem, we've almost certainly got weaknesses in the infrastructure as well. So version 1.1 was published in December 21. It's been out there for about a year. It brought together about 40 data sets. That's now gone up to about 50, a little bit over 50 in version 1.2. All the content on the website is open government license. It means we can publish it and you can have it as a download. That's crucial to understand because there may be data out there about assets and resources that you think should be here. And the reason they're not might well be because it's not an open data product. So if it's on the website, it's open government license. If it's not, it might not be. The standards website is not a GIS, it's not a geographical information system. It's a presentation, an interactive presentation of the information in the download. So the downloads are available on data.gov in various formats. But the information in those downloads, the actual data itself, is presented on the website in 9 modules, and connoisseurs out there of version 1.1 will be familiar. There are effectively 9 modules, now expanded to about 11. We have information on the basic asset distribution, so green and blue infrastructure asset maps. We've focused on developing an understanding of the accessibility of those publicly accessible assets. We've collated information on linear access networks, in particular the public rights of way system. We've developed specific information on blue infrastructure. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, that's all the soggy wet bits, as I call them. So all the water courses and all the water bodies, rivers, canals, lakes, ponds, etc. There is contextual information on designated and defined areas ranging from SSSI's scheduled monuments through to local authority boundaries. And we have currently 3 modules focusing on inequalities in provision and access to green spaces and natural green spaces, one of which focuses on access to nature close to home, where we're looking at the accessibility of resources to particular population cohorts, in particular children up to the age of 16 and older people 65 years and above. And then 2 specific analyses looking at inequalities in the distribution of assets with respect to either the index of multiple deprivation or population density, and then a range of socioeconomic statistical maps, particularly focused on population data for reference. So what can you do with it? Well, there are a huge range of uses for this sort of data, but it does allow you, for example, to start to understand what assets have I got out there and where are they? It also enables you to start to understand just how green is my neighbourhood, going beyond green spaces and assets to look at all the other green bits and pieces that exist but don't necessarily show up on the asset map. They're too small or it's not open data. We provide information you can start to work out on who's got access to what, within what proximity. So this particular map is showing those places and therefore those communities with some sort of proximity to a green space within about 15 minutes walk, and conversely therefore those that do not. And finally, we can start to see if we look at the inequalities of supply, we can start to ask questions: where do those inequalities matter the most? Where should we get focused our resources, our attention, in order to address a problem? But let's have a look at what's new in 1.2. So there is an awful lot more than we can go through in 10 minutes, but some highlights. We have expanded data on accessible green infrastructure by, for example, adding in information on access points. So we have maps of where the green spaces are, but where can you get into them? If you're interested in journey mapping from origin to destination, then where people go to will be determined by the network of roads and paths around the space, but also the actual points at which you can access them. We've input some information on what we call major barriers. So this is looking at where, even though there is a green space and an attendant buffer around it in terms of proximity and accessibility, the existence of things like motorways, railways and major watercourses can provide significant barriers to access. So we're looking here at places where potentially the access network within the buffer is severed, which means even if you can see the green space, you can't necessarily get there. And we've also started, and it is a start, on collating information about land with permissive access. This is usually private land. It could be wildlife trust land or RSPB land, or it could be owned by private sector organisations, but some form of public access is permitted. We're very interested to build this data. We don't have much at the moment, so a bit of an advert: if you're a landholding organisation and you provide permissive access to at least some of your estate and you'd like it on this map, get in contact. We'd love to talk to you. Likewise with the public rights of way network. Last time we had about 52, 53 gaps in the map where we didn't have data from the constituent highway authorities. We've managed to fill some of those gaps thanks to some local authorities coming forward. I think we're down to about 47 now, but we've still got 47 gaps. That includes Inner London, which never had this sort of data, so it's not quite as bad as it sounds. But if you are a highway authority with public rights of way data, particularly the sort of data that we can put in here, vector data, and you'd like to fill your gap, please get in contact. We'd love to talk to you. We have, for 1.2, extracted data from the network information that we have, both for the network and a new density map focused on what are often called the higher rights. So the network that's providing opportunity to do more than simply walk. So the bridleways, the restricted byways and the byways open to all traffic. So that's based on a 5 kilometre square grid, and we can see where the density is higher and where the density is lower, and in fact where there is very little, if any, density at all. And we've moved on. We've focused on creating maps of where the rights of way are, what their status is, what the density is. We're experimenting. I think this is a first step to put together a public rights of way experiential terrain map. What does that mean? Well, we're trying to map the probable physical characteristics of the route, so not just where it is and what it is there, but what's it like when you get there. So explore your local area and see what that says about your access infrastructure. I mentioned the blue infrastructure. We're back with the soggy wet bits. We had extensive content for version 1.1, which we've now expanded. Part of that content was looking at access to waterside across England. The method we used at the time we knew didn't work very well for urban areas, so we've amended the method and rerun it for what we call the urban mapping domain. So the slide on the left there shows you those lower super output areas which are urban. They add up to about 20% of England. So the new data is within that 20% of England, and it drills into the urban environment to expose those parts of the blue infrastructure network which are more likely to be either accessible or not accessible in a way that the previous work could not. And we've undertaken a new inequalities mapping exercise, combining data on green space provision with the linear access network, the public rights of way. So we've created a 5-kilometre grid again across the whole of England, and using various what we call inequalities classes from L1 to H3, identified which class each individual grid square fits within. So key for this map to look at, the L1 represents those areas with least of both, least amount of green space and least amount of public right of way, and H3 represent those places with the most of both. The fact they've got the most of both doesn't mean there aren't any problems. It just means comparatively they appear to be in a better position than other places. So, and finally, very nearly, coming up next, where are we going? Work on version 2, as I've said, has begun, and the first iteration 2.1 is due out just before Christmas this year. We're building significant new content. I'm frequently asked, when are we going to incorporate Census 21? The answer to that question is this year. So version 2 will be based on Census 21 data. Version 1 will be based on Census 2011. So we're resetting the clock from 2011 to Census 21. But we're also building a substantial amount of other functional and topical data and information, some focused on urban functionality and needs, with a particular probable climate change focus. A major project mapping across England at a 5 square metre pixel basis, so 20% of England, which is urban, map for urban habitats and naturalness. Long-term project will have some content, we hope, for the end of this year. That will be focused on assisting decision making for urban nature recovery in particular, and new data, new mapping for health and green infrastructure. You will notice, if you are a connoisseur of version 1.1, that the previous health data has disappeared. That's not because we're not interested, it's because we're doing some major work around health and green infrastructure, hopefully prepared and ready to publish in December. So it only really remains for me to say that the purpose of the green infrastructure mapping is to support the rollout and the launch today of the England Green Infrastructure Standards Framework. It's also part of the Natural Capital and Ecosystems Assessment Programme. I will thank you for listening, and at the final hurdle, I will hand over to the next speaker, Mr. Peter Neal. So Peter, over to you.